Good morning. The hour of 10 o'clock having passed, we are going to open the meeting of the House Liquor Control Committee as advertised. For the information of all those in attendance, this meeting is being videotaped by the Broadcasting Office of the House Bipartisan Management Committee. The video is also being made available to the news media and for streaming on House websites. Also, I ask that you please put your cell phones on vibrate, which I'm going to do myself right now. There we go. Okay. At this time, I'd like to ask Ms. Minnick to call the roll.
Chairman Ross?
Present.
Representative Here. Delozer? Here. Camp? Killian?
Here.
Krieger?
Here.
Mosser?
Here.
Riccarelli? Mustio?
Here.
Payne?
Here.
Petrie? Reese?
Here.
Regan?
Here.
Simmons?
Here.
Sonny?
Here.
Taylor?
Here.
Chairman Costa?
Here.
Representative Boyle?
Here.
Bradford? Brownlee? Here. Burns?
Here.
Conchici? Here. Harkins?
Here.
Mahoney?
Here.
Bradenstone?
Here.
Schreier?
Here.
Waters? We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I'm going to suspend my comments until later on in the meeting, but I wanted to, first of all, welcome everybody to the, most of my comments, I should say, but I did want to welcome everybody to the meeting and also give my fellow chair from the Democratic side an opportunity to say anything at this point, if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, let me say it's an honor to serve with you. The previous chairman and I got along pretty darn well, and we've had I thought we had some good legislation that we moved forward, and unfortunately some things that we didn't move forward, but I'm looking forward to working with you in this upcoming session. In addition to that, I'd like to welcome everyone to the ongoing saga of trying to privatize our liquor system in Pennsylvania. I know our committee has several new members. Looking at the photographs on your side, I see we have some new members on the committee too, but just know that, again, going back to the previous chair, I like to think that we work together pretty well, unfortunately not so well on items that we don't agree on, but for the most part, at least getting them to the point where we have to move them. And that's why we're here today. So welcome.
Even when we don't agree, we can be respectful of each other. So, all right. The one order of business today is consideration of House Bill 466, printers number 521. Is there a motion to call up the bill?
Let's go.
Representative Delozer, is there a second? Representative Mustio. I'll ask the executive director for a brief summary of the bill at this point.
House Bill 466 amends Title 47, the Liquor Code, to divest the Commonwealth from the retail and wholesale of wine and spirits. This bill is a redraft from House Bill 790 of last session, and the language is the same with a few minor clarifications and printer's corrections. Currently, the Liquor Code requires that the Commonwealth actively participate in the distribution and control of the sale of alcohol by establishing the Liquor Control Board as the sole source for the wholesale of the retail sale of wine and spirits. House Bill 466 sets forth a multi-phase divestiture process, initially providing for 1,200 wine and spirits retail licenses. These licenses are allocated by county and will be issued through an application process. For the first year, these licenses will only be available to licensed beer distributors. After this initial 12-month right of refusal, the remaining licenses will be offered to the public. The Department of General Services, in consultation with the Liquor Control Board, may issue additional licenses beyond the 1,200, up to 600, if deemed necessary for customer convenience. The bill further creates a grocery store license, which permits the sale of wine only up to 12 bottles. The licenses are subject to a quota of 1 license for every 15,000 residents of a county, with a guarantee that each county shall be issued 2 licenses regardless of the number of residents. It also provides for a gradual phase-out of the state-owned wine and spirits stores. When the number of private wine and spirits licenses plus grocery store licenses equals the number of state stores within a county, the Liquor Control Board shall provide rationale for the continued operation or closure of those stores. When the number of private licenses exceeds the number of state stores by 2 times within a county, all state-owned stores must close within 60 days. When the number of state-owned stores is less than 100, all remaining stores must close. Transition assistance is provided for employees whose employment is terminated as a sole and direct result of the privatization of liquor distribution. Wholesale divestiture will commence 12 months after enactment of the legislation. Wholesale wine and spirits licenses will be issued through an application process, and one license will be awarded to each successful applicant. The bill further provides for package reform permits available to beer distributors, allowing them to sell smaller quantities of beer down to a 6-pack, and restaurants allowing them to sell up to 2 12-packs. Restaurant license holders also have the option to obtain a wine-to-go permit, allowing the sale of up to 6 bottles of wine, and a spirits-to-go permit, allowing for the sale of 1 bottle of spirits. The current prohibition against the issuance of a liquor license for the same location where liquid fuels are sold is removed. House Bill 466 strengthens enforcement capabilities of liquor control enforcement and raises fines and penalties for violations by offending licensees. There are no amendments.
Thank you, and I'd like to recognize that we've been joined by Representative Kempf and ask that his name be added to the roll. Questions and comments from the members? Representative Schweier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, it's very exciting to be to have been asked to serve on this committee. This is certainly going to be a very interesting one, not only this year but next year as well. As we move forward and we look for ways to generate more revenue for the Commonwealth, generate more convenience, and make it easier for consumers to purchase alcohol, as well as ensure that we are able to maintain that folks under the age of 21 are not going to have access to alcoholic beverages, or certainly reduce the ability to do so. My question for you, sir, and for the committee is, and I've been here for all of 2 months. I've found my way around to the cafeteria, which has been a good start, I believe. But beyond that, as a freshman, I'm wondering, sort of a bill that has been in one form or another been introduced since before I was born. I'm just kind of curious, what's the rush? Why are me and 25 of my colleagues in the General Assembly that are also freshmen, 13% of the General Assembly or the House is turned over in the last at the last election? Why are we being asked to move so quickly on this without hearings?
Well, I would point out that legislation that we are handling at this point in the process is typically a series of bills that we've passed previously. We've voted a number of bills out of the House that have been considered in the prior session and were passed out of the House. This is another bill. This is a little bigger bill than some of the others, but it certainly is a bill that has been debated extensively in the past. I sympathize and remember when I was a freshman dealing with legislation that had been well considered in previous sessions. It's part of the job of a freshman to catch up. And as you may be aware, we offered opportunities for the freshmen in particular to ask questions prior to this meeting so that they could catch up to the other members. But I think most freshmen probably have had a chance to discuss this with their constituents previously when they were running as well. And there's a very substantial amount of debate, reports, comments from various affected parties that have been built up over the years. And particularly the language in this bill was gone over at some length previously in the last session. So I feel we have a pretty good body of information available to everybody at this point, and I feel comfortable that it's time for us to move forward and vote on the bill. Anyone else wish to be recognized at this point? Representative Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak a little bit about the fiscal impact of this bill. According to some of our analysis, the Commonwealth would lose $170 million in revenue, which does not include the transitional costs. This figure also does not include additional expenses associated with transitioning away from the traditional stores. Unemployment compensation, The additional enforcement and transition costs have not been calculated that I can see. There was a report, the PFM report estimates these costs would be approximately $177 million in a fiscal deficit crisis that we're in. So we're not only going to be losing money, but the one-time revenue doesn't seem to come close to what we need to even balance our budget. I have a question also. If we pay these fees along with the costs, and I do know that in Philadelphia, some of the stores that operate are operational, but they do not raise a profit, what would give the incentive for somebody in private industry to buy a license either in Philadelphia or even some of the rural stores if they're not going to turn a profit?
You're talking about individual state stores when you say stores?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I think the important thing to remember about the licenses that are being offered is they are potentially offered within the county, not necessarily in the individual locations where the current stores are. So the beer distributors that may bid on the first set of licenses may well expand their operations in their current location. They may move next door. They may have another location that they've been meaning to move to. So that gives them the opportunity to choose a location that is going to be most advantageous for them. Plus, of course, they are already selling beer, and I would assume selling that beer at a profit. So this would be an additional set of product that they would be able to add to enhance their profit. So that's the direct answer to your question. I certainly respect your opinion on the what you're expecting to happen with the fiscal impact of this, but it is not in keeping with the fiscal note that was made to 790. We do not obviously have a fiscal note for this bill yet, but since it's so similar to 790, I would assume that it's going to be quite similar to the fiscal note that was issued last session for 790, which indicated a one-time $1.123 billion fee that would be coming in. I would also argue that the employees of the state stores have a considerable amount of opportunity to get other jobs, and we've given them a fair amount of support. It's not unreasonable to assume that the licensing and enforcement aspects of the LCB are going to perhaps even absorb some of those employees as we go forward. And then there's the question exactly of how much money the state store system really is generating and how much it will be generating over the next few years. There's some serious concerns that with the part-time employees now being picked up under the Affordable Care Act, that the health care costs of the existing system are going to go up. We all know what's been going on with the pension contributions. That's going up. So there has been significant increases in some of the operational costs, and we expect those to go up further, which will further eat away at the actual monies that the system is currently offering. And most of the analysis that I've heard referred to in this situation that are negative don't assume any profit for the businesses that will be taking on additional operational opportunities here. The state store does not pay corporate net income tax system right now, taxes, or any of the other business taxes that we ask our private businesses to take. So as those sales shift over into the private sector, all those taxes will also be picked up. So we have a variety of different revenue streams that are going to be increasing. And with the additional convenience and the reduction in border bleed, I have every reason to believe that this is going to be a net positive, not a net negative. And before I go any further, I want to recognize that we've been joined by Representatives Bradford and Petrie and ask that they both be added to the rolls. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. One other question. You spoke about the current employees. What is being offered to the current employees as especially the ones who are going to be displaced by the system? Is there going to be any educational opportunities? Do they get any preference anywhere as far as another job is concerned? It's my understanding that there was at one point $1,000 offered to an employee for further education, when we know that the cost of education is much higher than that. So what is offered in this bill that's different from the last bill?
Yes, actually, there are a variety of different means of trying to deal with the displaced employees. First, they are granted an additional 3 points on a civil service exam for civil service positions, which is a substantial advantage in competing for civil service jobs. They have preferential treatment in hiring for state jobs that don't require civil services exams, so long as the employee holds the necessary skills. The $1,000 per year education grant that you're referring to is for going back to school part-time, and they have up to 4 years if they continue for receiving the $1,000 per year education grant. If they go back to school full-time, they get $2,000 per year up to 4 years. And then finally, if an employer hires one of these designated displaced employees, the employer gets a $2,000 per year tax credit against any of their state taxes for 2 years, so a total of $4,000. Again, a substantial incentive for them to try and hire these employees. So we're helping encourage private employers. We're giving the employees an advantage in hiring on with the state elsewhere. And if this is the time when they wish to get an additional educational boost to transition into other kinds of work, we give them an assistance in that. And finally, I'd note that obviously, as these private entities are looking at, private applicants are looking to take on the opportunity to sell what is currently being sold by the state, that they will in turn also be looking for employees. So I would assume that the displaced employees would have an excellent opportunity to compete for those jobs as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments at this time? Representative Donatucci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Coming from Philadelphia, we've always had problems with stop and goes, nuisance bars, and enforcement becomes difficult because we do need more enforcement officers. Now that they're going to triple the amount of places selling alcohol, the different licenses give us different times of operation, different types of alcohol that can be purchased at these places. How many new enforcement and compliance officers does this bill offer us? What will that cost be, and who's going to pay for it?
Well, first of all, I would challenge the concept that we're tripling the places where alcohol is sold. To the degree that the 1,200 initial licenses are taken up by the beer distributors, they are already selling alcohol. So that's an existing alcohol outlet. It will change the product line, of course, but the issues of underage drinking and visibly intoxicated persons being served will be no different in sense that alcohol will still be sold through that same outlet. So that one I would say is perhaps not a problem. But we have done some substantial things in improving enforcement in this legislation, which I do want to highlight since you brought them up. First of all, we've heard from those that are concerned about the issue of stop and goes that the fines associated are too low. They don't wind up serving a serious enough deterrent. So the fines are across the board being raised 5 times, and to that degree, we're hoping that's going to be a significant deterrent. Second of all, we're allowing the state police to serve as undercover agents for the and be fully available to the liquor enforcement now in a way that they're not. They're purely supervisory currently. So now getting them out in some of those bars where we need more effective undercover agents to catch the violations that are currently occurring, that will be an opportunity to increase enforcement. And finally, the opportunity to revoke a license for serious offenses that have been repeated, which is not currently on offer and is being explicitly added here. To close down a licensee for 2 consecutive weekend days is a significant enforcement enhancement, which we're hoping will also go a long way toward addressing some of the concerns that I know you and others have in places, parts of Philadelphia and others, some of our other cities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only problem I have with that a little bit is the amount of state police that we have right now, because it's my understanding, I could be wrong, that right now we are at a lower time of the amount of state troopers that we have. So will there be enough to go around?
Well, I certainly agree with you, and I've been a strong advocate for increasing the complement of the state police. But I would note that the officers that will be rotating into the LCE would not count toward the complement. So we won't be putting any additional burdens. We do all need, separate from this, as part of the budget discussions, to be working hard to get the trooper complement up. And quite frankly, I think the artificial cap on the troopers is a wrong idea anyway, and I've had legislation to get rid of that so that we can get the trooper complement to the needed number as soon as possible and have more flexibility in keeping it to the number we need. But those are really outside the scope of this piece of legislation. Well, I don't suffer from that ambition, but thank you anyway. Any other members wish to be recognized at this point? Representative Bradford.
I just want to follow up. One question you had was the 3 times more outlets than currently exist, and you pushed back on that assertion. Can you tell me how many outlets are there currently, and how many licenses would this bill make possible in the Commonwealth?
Well, I'm advised that there are, I think, 1,194 beer distributors currently, so the 1,200 licenses that would initially be offered, if they're picked up by beer distributors, would essentially fill in that number. Any that are not picked up would obviously go to potentially new bidders. And remember, we are also closing down the approximately 600 state stores over a period of time. So that gives you some idea of those two.
Right. Can you give me an idea of what the rationale is for giving the beer distributors kind of the right of first refusal for the licenses?
Yes, the beer distributors have already made a substantial investment in the license system as it exists. They're the private entity that is already present in the marketplace. And they're small businesses in many cases. We were concerned to make sure that these small businesses that had operated under our existing rules and made investments in their existing locations not be put at an excessive disadvantage. So they already have the experience of selling alcohol in the state. They already have the concerns and have been able to address the issues of appropriately avoiding some of the problems that we have mentioned before of the concerns about visibly intoxicated or underage drinking. So it seemed a logical place to start. And that was the main issue, trying to be sensitive to small businesses that are already invested in the liquor system.
Right. I would just point out, and I guess there's not really a question there, I appreciate the concern for the beer distributors. I think a lot of us wish there was the same concern for the workers of the current state store system. Similarly, the taxpayers have invested in this current system. We're now the owner of this asset, whether that is whether we would want to be in the business of selling liquor 100 years later is a good question, but I think we have this asset now, and how we maximize value for the taxpayer is a question that I don't think is being adequately addressed in this discussion. I understand we want to help the beer distributors as they transition, so I would ask, do the beer distributors as a whole support this bill?
I think the association has indicated a negative position. I have talked to some individual beer distributors who see more benefit in this. I would say that, yes, this is a balancing act, and and I've come to this somewhat late in the game. I was a rank and file member considering this on the floor last session, although I had been on the committee previously. But I believe that the prior chairman, staff, and other members that have worked on this have taken a great deal of effort to consider the potentially displaced workers with the items that I'd mentioned previously, that they've been thoughtful in wanting to be fair to all parties, but also to make sure that we got a good return and maximize the revenues that were appropriate without going too far in the other direction and creating a disadvantageous system. So unlike some of the other states that have gone into this, we're holding our tax structure the same, which is significantly different than some of the other states that have been involved in this. And there is a balance effort here. Reasonable people could try and strike the balance differently. And obviously, we're continuing discussions with all other parties. If somebody else has other ideas as we go along here, we're certainly open, but we've given people a fair chance up till now, I think, to put other options on the table, and I think this represents a pretty good consensus from the House as a whole at this point.
Right. I guess my other question then would be in terms of how we reach the valuation. I know in other contexts, for example, when we sell land in the Commonwealth, we require an appraisal. Have we done an appraisal of what the value of these 600 existing retail stores are? What the free market would bear. One of the concerns has obviously been by some on the Tea Party right wing side is the concern about crony capitalism, that we're wiring these licenses to selected groups as opposed to letting the true free market have its way. If we're selling a monopoly, which is what it has been in the Commonwealth, and there are 600 of these retail establishments, what is the true value of the 600? What's the true value of the wholesale? It seems like that is a system that we've invested as taxpayers. Again, you can agree or disagree with why we find ourselves in ownership of that monopoly, but we've put a lot of capital outlay into it. Now we have this asset. Are we truly maximizing the value? Are we giving the taxpayers back the money that they've put into the system? It seems like when we set license fees as opposed to letting, whether it's an auction or some kind of open way of determining this, we're pretty much choosing winners and losers. And we've decided not to give the taxpayer their true value, and at the same time, not really take care of, it seems like anybody's really supportive of this. It seems like we've tried to come up with a compromise that makes nobody happy.
Well, most compromises make nobody happy in my experience. But having gotten over that hurdle, I would say that, yes, there was an extensive effort to try and properly value the system. Clearly, some locations where the state stores are currently located are much less valuable than others. But we're not simply auctioning off or thinking of auctioning off the ones in their current location. The system is designed to work with the beer distributors initially, and then with those that want to enter in after the beer distributors to essentially make sure that they're distributed broadly. If we merely auctioned them off, I think we would run the risk of having several large corporations snap them up, perhaps concentrate them very heavily in the most advantageous places and maybe not distribute them properly throughout the county. There are a lot of other ways that people could probably come up with to do this differently. But I think that when trying to balance respect for the small businesses that are already in the liquor business, when trying to balance the idea of a good distribution throughout the state, when trying to make sure that we got good value out of the asset as we have it, I think this is a fair balance. I understand other people don't feel that way, but I think that overall I feel pretty comfortable that we've made a good balance here to be fair to the taxpayer, be fair to the beer distributors, be fair to the employees, be fair to all the parties that are involved.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess I'll just sum up because I was not fortunate enough to be on the committee last year as well and realize that this bill does have some important differences than the bill that was brought up last year. Without the benefit of a hearing, could you give me an outlay of what the main differences are between this bill as it sits now and what was voted on the floor last year, and if you'd be amenable to a hearing to discuss those differences.
Well, I would disagree that they're important. They're really very minor. So therefore, that's why I didn't think it was at all necessary to have additional hearings on them. There are 3 items that I would put in the category of corrections and clarifications, and they are very simply this: that it was never the intent, I don't think, of any of us, that people would be allowed to run the liquor they were buying in a grocery store over a self-checkout swipe. It's kind of contrary to being able to check whether or not the person's 21, to have them put on an honor basis and swipe out on their own. So that was one of the changes. The second change was literally a typographical error where we inadvertently suspended the rights that restaurants have for cap and carry for wine that they sell in the restaurants. A couple of brackets were removed. They were removed incorrectly. So that's the second item. The third item was the subject of cap and carry for spirits. And basically, there was a broad consensus that the idea of encouraging somebody to open the bottle of spirits and then carry it out of the place where they were purchasing it was not a good idea. So the modification is to have the bottle of spirits be closed and be sold as a closed bottle. I don't think that sums up enough of a change to justify major hearings, but hope that helps you clarify what the minor changes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions at this point? Representative Mosser.
It was asked and answered last year. I just want to clarify. As a shareholder in a family business that is a licensee, I'm okay to vote on this. There's no need to abstain.
The lawyer in the room?
Yes, you may vote on this.
Yes, I think we've held frequently on the House floor that if you're members of a broad class, we're all members of broad classes when we take tax votes and things like that. You're a member of a broad class. And actually, I think we have people here from the Ethics Committee, so I don't know whether anybody else wants to comment, but it's my understanding that you should withhold your vote and abstain from voting if you are specifically advantaged and others are not within that class. But I don't think that would apply to you in this situation. But thank you for asking. We'll put that on the record. Representative Burns.
My family also owns a retail license, a restaurant license. And I guess my question is, I see in the bill that there's a way that a retail dispenser license can be transferred to become a restaurant license. Is that correct?
It's the eating, which is beer only, the eating place license. So you can have you pay that one-time fee of $30,000, and you can be transferred to a full restaurant, so you can sell beer, wine, and spirits on site.
So in one aspect, you're telling us that we're creating value by allowing us to sell, or retail licensees to sell, restaurant licenses to sell wine to go and liquor to go, correct?
One bottle of spirits, yeah.
One bottle.
Spirits.
But then we're turning around and allowing beer-only places to sell or become retail or restaurant licenses, thus devaluing the current licensees.
Repeat that. I'm sorry. I wasn't following the logic of that.
We are allowing their e-licenses
Yes.
to become restaurant licenses, right?
Okay. There's only 500.
Okay, for 30,000.
Yes.
Either way, if there's one extra, it devalues the current licensees.
It does to some degree, but I think we also are recognizing that there's value added, so I'm not sure in any individual case whether you can really say exactly how this is going to specifically play out. I think the advantages for the restaurants outweigh the potential risks, though, and I think that overall they would come out ahead on that.
In some areas, there's going to be winners, and in some areas, there's going to be losers in this, especially in the distributor licenses. As we look at Cambria County, which is where I'm from, With a population of 143,000 people, we have 30 distributor licenses in Cambria County. Per 30,000 people, there's 30 licenses in Cambria County. As we look at Bucks County, there's 625 licenses, or there's 625,000 people, and there's 30 licenses for that county. So I can't imagine how this would be profitable for the licensees in my area.
Well, I would make the same argument that the restaurants operate under the same disadvantage of dispersed population, that the state stores operate under the same disadvantage of dispersed population. Clearly, if you look at the list of state stores around the Commonwealth, there's some that, actually one in my district that is number 2 in terms of its total gross sales in the entire state. And then there are others that are remarkably low in their overall abilities, or their total sales. So we have that right now. And I wouldn't pretend to say that all the licenses and all the locations are going to be equal. They aren't right now. They won't be, whether we pass this bill or not.
So for the distributors out there listening to this, especially the ones in my district, they're optimistic by this legislation because some of the things that are in the media saying how this is beneficial to the licensees, especially the distributors, to enter the alcohol business. However, they're underestimating their competition. They're looking at the distributor down the street saying, I can do this better than that guy. What they're failing to recognize is that the competition is coming from out-of-state companies. They're going to be coming here, buying up these licenses, and opening up what we call the Walmart of wine and liquor. And they're eventually going to put those guys out of business. So I'm telling the distributors in my district to proceed with caution on this. Thank you.
Well, I would raise a couple of points on this. First of all, the license fees for the beer distributors in the very rural counties for wine only are as little as $7,500. And that can be paid out over 4 years. So it's a very modest fee that they're incurring. Similarly, the Walmarts, I think, are probably not going to be blowing into the extremely rural areas that aren't otherwise able to support it. So if there's an uptake of business, it is one that we will wind up having to adjust. Every business has to adjust right now. Existing beer distributors have to adjust to the competition that they're currently getting from those restaurants that are picking up from those grocery stores that are picking up restaurant licenses. One of the things I've been disturbed about is that people seem to be mixing up the fact that take-up of restaurant licenses by grocery stores is somehow connected to this bill. It's totally unconnected. It's happening now. So really, if you're worried about that, that is independent of whether this bill passes or fails. As a matter of fact, if I were a beer distributor, I would want some new tools to address the threat that I'm currently under. But I won't pretend that very rural areas are going to make as much money off of this as more highly densely populated, and we've recognized that in the fee structure so that it's substantially more expensive for second-class A and third-class counties than it is for the eighth-class counties, for example. Anybody else wish to be recognized at this point?
I'm up.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Costa.
Thank you. Got a little excited there. I was jotting down notes as the people were asking questions, and I'm going to try and go in the order that the questions were asked. We started with Representative Schweier, who asked a question about hearings. The last time we actually had a hearing was in 2011, and since then there are 56 new members in the House. And I appreciate that the Leader's Office did do a synopsis last week. Unfortunately, a lot of us could not make it to that synopsis because we knew that was a week off and that we scheduled a lot of things in our office. But one of the things I wanted to bring up was the speaker whose bill this is previously on a PCN show was mistaken in a lot of the things that he said. And it comes out now that the spokesperson for the Republican caucus said, well, those were mistakes because he was confused. Well, if he's confused and it's his bill, how do you think the rest of us feel? I mean, I think there was a reason and there is justification for us to have hearings just to make sure that we clarify all the concerns that were in that bill. So that was issue number one. The next issue was brought up was the budget and addressing the budget. If this bill becomes law in the status that it's in now, will have very minimal impact on this fiscal year. And I realize that we have a problem this year and we're going to have a problem next year, but we need to address that as soon as possible. So assuming that we receive $1 million from this sale of the wholesale and the retail, the way I look at it and the investment that it is from our state that we're going to lose, in 5 to 6 years, we break even. After year 6, we start losing money every single year. And that burden of losing money comes on to the taxpayers, that everyone, the people that drink and the people that don't drink, are going to start paying higher taxes to make up the roughly what I believe is a $200 million deficit every year after year 6. We talked about jobs and the 3,500 jobs that are possibly could be lost. And I appreciate that there is something in there to give these members that work in our stores the ability to go back to school. But $1,000 or $2,000 when education costs over $10,000 a year. So you're telling me that someone who just lost their job, is no longer working, is going to have to come up with $8,000 to go back to school, even if they already have a degree. I don't know what it's going to help them, but if they don't have a degree, God bless them that they'll get a better education, but will that $1,000 really make that much of a difference? I'd like to think that we have the ability to keep those jobs today. We realize that there's changes that need to be made. And there's been suggestions of some things that we can and we should do, that we could maximize the profits of our current system. I'm in favor of that. I think there's a lot of things that we could possibly agree on if we can get to that point. Again, but some of those changes would maximize the profits. Why would we, as a Commonwealth, want to get rid of an asset that we don't maximize its capabilities? Why don't we look at that first? Let's see if we can fix what we have. Let's say if you were selling a car, would you sell it as a piece of junk, or would you try and fix it up and get more money for it? We have the ability to fix up our stores to make them more consumer convenience and give a little bit more variety to our consumers, and possibly then look at if we can't maximize our profits, then maybe look down the road. But as of right now, I think we should look at making those changes. And these changes that are made in the current legislation, we'd like to think that we're trying to make it easier for people. It's just more confusing. There's several more different options that you would have the ability to do, and I think it's more confusing than it is for convenience. But I realize that this is part of the process, and I can count. And I realize that this is more than likely going to be a party line vote, and it'll probably be pretty much the same way on the House floor. But I did want to get some of those points made that, again, I think there is a better way to do this. I'd like to offer those opportunities, but I realize that the votes aren't here to do that at this particular time. And I'm hoping that down the road that we will have an opportunity to make those changes. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me that time.
Thank you, and I certainly respect your positions, and even though I don't agree with them, I respect your opportunity to have a chance to share them with us today. Again, the bill is not new. It is the same bill that we all spent considerable amount of time on last session. I certainly, and I'm sure that my colleagues have received a considerable amount of information from all the affected parties prior to this, so I think they've had a chance to review it. It was telegraphed for some time that we were going to be doing it this week. Second, on the budget, I really respectfully disagree with the total effects because, as I said before, as you move from a public system to a private one with greater opportunities and a greater degree of convenience, two things happen. First of all, the private sector pays corporate taxes, which the government doesn't pay. And secondly, the opportunities for greater greater selection and more convenience will cut down on the border bleed, which has been estimated in some cases in the nature of several $100 million a year. So right there, that's a tremendous impact. Secondly, I do believe that many of the jobs and job training that the existing employees are going to be looking for will be technical in nature and will probably not be in the $10,000 a year category. So I think that $2,000 a year stipend for someone going in and getting some additional technical training could turn out to be quite beneficial and maybe the critical difference. And then finally, we come to the bottom line here. Some have suggested that, we just ought to try and fix this system. Maybe we're not doing it quite as well as we might otherwise. There's a reason we're not doing it quite as well as it might be done otherwise, and that's because the state is trying to sell alcohol. At the end of the day, this is a private retail and wholesale business that in every other state except for one is managed by the private sector. We don't have state grocery stores. We don't have state gas stations. China, Russia, and in certain cases, some of the socialist governments in Europe went down the road of thinking that they could run a steel company. They could run a variety of different private entities and do it better. But at the end of the day, government is really focused in and should be focused in on different things. It is very appropriate for us to take the resources that we have and think seriously about making sure we do a good job with licensing so that people who should not be holding licenses because they're disreputable or because they're otherwise going to abuse the public not get licenses or have licenses removed from them if they're improper to hold those licenses. We should do good enforcement so that those bars and those retail outlets that are selling to minors or selling to visibly intoxicated people are stopped and are punished. Those are good state functions. We should not be in the position of, on the one hand, preaching responsible drinking and turning around and encouraging people to buy more alcohol through the marketing side. So there's a fundamental flaw in the system as it's developed. It's an artifact. It goes back to 1930. Most everybody else has moved away from that. It's time for us to get to that point. Reasonable people will disagree about exactly the details of how we might go about this, but we have a chance in a historic way to move outside of a failed and system that was never meant to really be successful if we think about it honestly. And so I urge a positive vote on the bill. Thank all the members for their support, and unless there's any final comments at this point, yes, Representative Boyle. Ravenstall, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Past Boyle, I saw Ravenstall.
Trust me, it happens a lot. Just very briefly, in this legislation, is there any limit on the wholesale and retail markups? No?
No, it's
Okay.
It's a private sector market. I think there's a competitive limitation on it.
Well, to follow up on that, in your opinion, would the prices of the products be less after passing House Bill 466, or your comparison? I guess my thought is what happened in the state of Washington, and if you could elaborate on that. I think they have experienced some difficulties, and maybe that plan has not been as successful as it was thought prior to passing that legislation. If you could just elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think the pricing is going to be quite comparable coming out the other end. I'm not saying any individual product in every single store is going to be priced exactly the same because it will be a free market. But the free market itself will help to drive prices to a competitive level. Washington was a unique situation because they attempted to do two things at once. They privatized at the same time that they dramatically increased their taxes. They put a 10% and then a 17% tax on top of the existing price structure that they had, which was already pretty high. So when you add those extra 27%, and I think they're compounded, so it may be working its way up closer to 30%, you're shocking the customer pretty substantially. So I think they misunderstood how to do this. We're doing it totally differently. So I think we will not see anything like what Washington has gone through. Sure. Chairman Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only question would be, why did Washington raise the taxes so severely? I would assume is to make up for the revenue that they were losing. And I'm afraid that we might be going down that same path. As I said earlier, after 6 years, we start losing money. Maybe that's why Washington raised the taxes at the level that they
Well,
did.
my daughter and son-in-law live in Washington, and I think from my understanding, they were sold a bill of goods that this was going to make a huge dent in the budget deficit that had nothing to do with the state sewer system or the system they were discontinuing. They were intending to make a huge grab, and I think we ought to be careful about making sure that as we go forward, we don't make that mistake. I don't think this bill has that mistake in it. I feel confident that we did not go down that road. And so comparisons with Washington and this bill, I think, are really not accurate and are misleading.
I was just trying to make the point that there was a state that had control of the wholesale, and they allowed beer and wine in grocery stores, and then they opted to allow liquor to be sold in the grocery stores too. And they anticipate a loss in revenue when they let that happen.
Well, I think the increase in taxes was always built into that particular version, which we did not build into this one. Representative Mustio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to follow up on your comments, I think what we have to do is get beyond reading the headlines on those articles when it talks about Washington State, because if you actually read the articles themselves, it points out several points, one of which you've made, is that the taxes were raised and are the highest in the country now in Washington. Secondly, they talk about in one of the articles where money isn't being appropriated for the enforcement provisions to prevent underage drinking, as an example. But that's because the legislature made that call. They did not appropriate where they should have appropriated. So I expect that we, as members of a committee and a body that want to make sure that's taken care of, we won't do things like that. In addition, one of the retail purchasers of a license in Washington State is paying an additional $30,000 to $40,000 more a year in taxes and fees than they did previously, because those taxes were increased. So again, the headlines say one thing. They say they're going to Idaho, for example, but many of the stores, as one of the consumers said, look, it's going to cost me more in gas to drive to Idaho than the savings. So again, I think we need to, the devil's in the details as always,
Right.
And I think that we're doing the right thing here in the state.
Yeah, and to follow up, the distinction with Washington is that we've increased the fines dramatically so that will provide more cash to be able to help with the enforcement side. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Chairman Ross,
Aye.
Representative Corbin. Aye. Delozer. Aye. Hanf.
Aye.
Killian.
Yes.
Krieger. Yes. Mosser.
Aye.
Nicorelli. Mustio.
Yes.
Payne.
Yes.
Petrie.
Yes.
Reese.
Yes.
Regan.
Yes.
Simmons.
Yes.
Sonny.
Yes.
Taylor.
Yes.
Chairman Costa.
No.
Representative Boyle.
No.
Bradford.
No.
Brownlee.
Aye.
Burns.
No.
Donatucci. No. Harkins. Mahoney.
No.
Ravenstall.
No.
Schweier.
No.
Waters. 15 yes, 10 no.
Thank you very much. The bill is reported with a favorable recommendation to the floor. And I want to thank all the members for coming in. I know I got you in a little early this morning, and I hope nobody had any difficulties. Please stay in touch. We'll be letting you know about future hearings. And at this time, I'll take a motion from Representative Krieger and a second from Representative Sonny to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.